Left 4 Dead has one of the most underrated stories in gaming history, and most of it isn't even in the games. It's buried in a 4-part comic that Valve quietly released alongside the Sacrifice DLC. Today, I'm breaking down every single part of that comic, starting with the old man who was already dead before the zombies showed up. Bill's military past. Bill Overbeck didn't survive the zombie apocalypse. The zombie apocalypse survived him finally finding a reason to die. Before the green flu ever hit, Bill served in the US Army 1st Special Forces Group across 2 tours in Vietnam. He earned a chest full of medals and an honorable discharge after shrapnel tore through his knee. Then, he went home. And that was the problem. Here's the thing the comic makes painfully clear. This was a man with a full arsenal of combat skills and zero outlet for any of them. Peacetime didn't save Bill. It buried him. So when the infection hit and 3 strangers needed someone to keep them alive, Bill grabbed an M16, organized the group like a military unit, and started running operations like he was back in the jungle. His knee never stopped him, not once. His entire pre-infection life was unconscious preparation for one specific moment, holding a position against overwhelming force while his unit escaped. Every single thing Bill ever trained for pointed directly at that bridge. But Bill's story is just the beginning, because the guy standing next to him, he was having possibly the worst first day of unemployment in human history. Lewis's corporate breakdown. Lewis was an associate account manager at his company's IT department in Philadelphia. If that sounds like the kind of job that slowly drains your soul through a fluorescent lit cubicle, that's because it was. Here's the thing, Lewis wasn't just unhappy at work, he was stuck. Every single day, he'd sit in that office, handling tickets and troubleshooting problems a trained monkey could solve, knowing he was capable of more, but never quite making the move. The infection made the decision for him. The apocalypse literally solved his career dissatisfaction, which is, not ideal. What makes Lewis interesting is that nothing about his background screams zombie survivor. He was a white-collar office worker with zero combat training and zero tactical experience. The guy's most physically demanding pre-outbreak activity was probably walking to the break room. But when an infected attacked him in his office building, he handled it. He stepped out to find his coworkers dead, the building overrun, the outside world collapsing, and he just kept going. And then there's the pop culture obsession, Counter-Strike references, Half-Life worship, genuine mourning over the idea of no Xbox on a potential island escape. This was a guy whose entire emotional life existed inside a monitor because his professional life gave him absolutely nothing. Gaming wasn't a hobby for Louis, it was an accidental crash course in threat assessment he didn't know he was taking. But if Lewis's pre-apocalypse life was quietly frustrating, Zoe's was an outright nightmare. Zoe's family tragedy. Zoe was a film student at Aldrich College in Philadelphia, scholarship kid, future filmmaker, the whole deal. Except she wasn't actually going to class. She spent most of her first semester locked in her dorm room watching horror movies instead of attending a single lecture, which honestly is the most relatable thing anyone in this franchise has ever done. Her parents were divorced and could not agree on what Zoe's life should look like. Her father Wade was a police officer who took her to shooting ranges and fed her love of horror films. Her mother Carolyn wanted basically the opposite of all that, 2 parents pulling in completely different directions, and Zoe just existed in the middle, absorbing both influences. Then the infection hit her family home, and infected broke in and mauled Carolyn to death. Wade managed to kill it, but he believed he'd been contaminated in the process. So he begged his daughter to shoot him before he turned. Zoe picked up his gun, said "I love you, Dad," and put a bullet in his head. Here's where it gets genuinely cruel. Later in the comic, Zoe learns that carriers don't actually turn. They carry the infection but never become infected themselves, which means her father, the man she executed out of mercy, might have been completely fine. The 2 gifts he gave her, a love of horror and the ability to shoot straight, were exactly what kept her alive in the apocalypse. They were also exactly what allowed her to kill him. That guilt follows her everywhere. The horror movie girl who spent a semester watching fictional zombies had to put down her own father during a real one, and she might not have even needed to. But if Zoe's backstory is a tragedy, Francis's is more like a rap sheet, a long one. Francis' lawless streak. Francis is the guy your mom warned you about. Tattooed biker, criminal record, zero respect for authority, and a deep personal hatred of basically everything. Before the outbreak, he was running in circles that most people cross the street to avoid, which is, not ideal for a functioning member of society, but turns out it's perfect for the end of the world. The Sacrifice comic shows soldiers at Millhaven struggling to organize civilians, and Francis is right there making their lives harder. He doesn't trust them. He doesn't like them. While Bill's military background means he understands chain of command and Louis defaults to cooperation, Francis looks at a man in uniform and sees someone who's about to ruin his day. Here's the thing. his friction with Lewis in the comic is way more intense than anything in the game. These two genuinely do not like each other, and it surfaces even when they're actively trying not to die. But Francis's criminal instincts gave him something the others didn't have: street-level survival awareness, weapons familiarity that didn't come from a training manual, a psychological tolerance for chaos that Bill earned in Vietnam and Francis earned in, let's say, less honorable circumstances. The funniest part is that the person society would have considered the least valuable citizen turned out to be perfectly built for extinction-level events. His hatred of authority is played for laughs in the games, but in the comic, it starts looking less like a personality flaw and more like prophecy, because the military isn't coming to save them. And Francis knew that before anyone else did, but his distrust of soldiers is about to look a whole lot more justified once the group sees what's actually waiting at the outpost. The military outpost, Echo. After everything they've been through, the survivors finally get rescued by the military. Helicopters, soldiers, the whole deal. For the first time since the outbreak, it actually looks like the system works. They're alive, they're in custody, and they're heading somewhere safe, except they're not heading to the Echo safe zone. They're being diverted to a place called Millhaven for testing, which is, not ideal. Millhaven operates under protocols that have absolutely nothing to do with saving people. The facility is built around epidemiological containment, which is a fancy way of saying the military has already decided the survivors aren't lucky, they're dangerous. Lieutenant Mora oversees the whole operation, and she becomes the human face of what is essentially institutional betrayal wearing a uniform. Everything about Millhaven looks like rescue. The fences, the medical staff, the organized procedures, but none of it exists to protect the survivors. It exists to process them. And then the doctor drops the real bombshell. The military has been executing carriers by firing squad. Not infected, not zombies. Carriers. People who look perfectly healthy, feel perfectly healthy, and are perfectly healthy, except for the fact that they can spread the virus without showing symptoms. The military's solution to this problem is bullets. So every rescue helicopter, every military checkpoint, every soldier waving you towards safety, it was all a pipeline leading to a wall and a blindfold. The survivors didn't escape the apocalypse. They walked directly into a government-sanctioned death sentence. But the firing squads aren't even the worst part. It's what the survivors learn about themselves next that truly changes everything. The carrier revelation. Here's where the comic stops being a zombie survival story and becomes something way, way worse. The military doctor sits the survivors down and explains what carrier actually means. They're not immune. They never were. They're asymptomatic carriers, people whose genetics allow them to resist the symptoms of infection while still carrying and transmitting the virus to every single person they come in contact with. They feel perfectly healthy. They look perfectly healthy. And they are walking bioweapon. The science behind it is genuinely unsettling. The resistance gene is a recessive allele on the X chromosome. Males only need one copy to be resistant, but females need two, one on each X chromosome. Run the math on that, and roughly 1 in 3 males in the pre-outbreak population would qualify as carriers, but only 1 in 9 females, which suddenly explains why survivor groups are almost entirely dudes, and why someone like Zoe is exceptionally rare. For Zoe specifically, this hits like a freight train. The recessive gene had to come from both parents, meaning her father Wade carried the resistance gene, meaning he may never have been at risk of turning when she put a bullet in his head. But here's the kicker. The doctor confirms the infection mutates constantly. Vaccines are impossible. Even carrier resistance could fail at any moment. There is no cure, there is no stability, there's just borrowed time, and suddenly every prior mystery clicks into place. Why helicopter pilots died after extracting survivors. Why safe zones collapsed the moment rescued civilians arrived. Why the military treats every rescue operation as a containment liability. The survivors weren't being saved, they were spreading the plague to everyone who tried to help them. Every escape attempt killed the rescuers. The darkest twist in this entire comic isn't that zombies exist, it's that the survivors themselves are the reason the infection keeps winning, which is, not ideal. But if you think that existential crisis is bad, wait until the infected send their biggest weapon to make sure nobody leaves alive. The first tank encounter, up until this point, the survivors have been dealing with hordes, hunters, smokers, the usual infected lineup. Dangerous, sure, but manageable. Then they hit the docks, step into a train car, and meet something that rewrites every rule they thought they understood about this infection. The tank doesn't stumble toward them like common infected. It moves with purpose. Deliberate, focused, like a freight train that decided to hate you personally. The thing is a wall of grotesque muscle that barely resembles anything human anymore, and when the survivors open fire, something becomes immediately clear. It doesn't care. The comic shows this thing absorbing gunfire with almost zero visible damage. No blood splatter, no wounds, nothing. It just keeps coming. Which is, not ideal. Here's where it gets weird. When they finally finally manage to set it on fire, its hair incinerates completely, leaving it bald. And that detail stays consistent across every single tank depiction in the comic. It's a small thing, but it tells you something important about the biology at play here. This creature regenerates tissue fast enough to shrug off bullets, but keratin burns like everything else. So congratulations, you can give it a bad haircut. That's about all conventional weapons accomplish. It takes every survivor firing simultaneously to bring this thing down. One person alone, zero chance, and that's the real lesson this encounter teaches. The tank isn't just a bigger zombie, it's a categorical shift in what the infection can produce. If one of these nearly kills all 4 of them working together, the math on facing 3 at once doesn't just look bad, it looks like a funeral. And their next move is about to make that math very, very relevant: the boat escape. Every system that was supposed to save them has tried to kill them instead. The military wanted them dead. The evacuation points were traps. So the survivors do the only logical thing left. They find a sailboat and decide to save themselves. The plan is simple: get to the boat docked near Rayford Port, sail through Georgia's waterways, and put enough distance between themselves and the mainland that neither the infected nor the military can touch them. No more trusting helicopters that crash, no more outposts that turn into execution chambers. Just open water and whatever comes next. But there's a problem. The road bridge near the port is lowered, blocking their route entirely. To get the boat through, they need to raise it mechanically, which means generators, which means noise, which means every infected in the area is about to receive a dinner invitation. And then there's Louis, the group's most relentlessly optimistic member, the guy who kept morale together when everyone else was ready to quit, runs into a boat full of witches, his leg gets torn apart. The comic shows this injury in brutal detail, panels dedicated to the damage and the immediate aftermath. The game skips it entirely, but in the comic, it's right there. The one person who never stopped believing things would work out gets physically broken at the exact moment they need him most. Here's the thing about the boat, though. It's not just transportation. It's a rejection of every authority that promised safety and delivered a firing squad. The survivors aren't escaping the infection, they're escaping humanity's response to it, which brings us to the bridge itself, because raising it is going to cost them everything. The Georgia Bridge. The bridge near Rayford Port is the single worst place on Earth to make noise. Naturally, that's exactly what the survivors have to do. Here's the setup. The bridge operates on a mechanical system requiring 3 generators to be started in sequence. Each generator has to be manually activated, and each activation sends out a sound wave that basically functions as a dinner bell for every infected in Georgia. The first generator brings a horde, the second brings a bigger one, the third brings something worse. Every step forward makes the situation exponentially more dangerous, but they have zero choice. The bridge has to be raised so their sailboat can pass underneath, and the only way to raise it is to fire up all 3 generators, get everyone onto the bridge deck, and then trigger the lift mechanism. That's the geometry of survival here. The only exit requires maximum noise in the most hostile territory they've ever set foot in, and Georgia is hostile. The infection started in Pennsylvania and has had weeks to spread south, mutate, and diversify. By the time it reached Georgia, the virus had cooked up every special infected variant you can imagine. The bridge itself is almost mocking them, a piece of infrastructure that civilization built to connect people, now transformed into a choke point that requires military-scale effort just to cross. This 3-generator format, activate an objective while defending against escalating waves, became the iconic Left 4 Dead finale template. This comic sequence is the canonical origin of that design, and it works because the cruelty is baked into the mechanics. Progress and danger are the same action. You can't move forward without making things worse, which would be bad enough on its own. But what comes next makes the generators look like a warm-up. The 3 tanks. Here's the thing about fighting a tank. 1 tank is a nightmare. 2 tanks is a death sentence. 3 tanks, back to back, while you're bleeding, exhausted, and running low on ammo, that's not a fight. That's math telling you someone isn't making it out. The first one hits them at the docks, bursting out of a train car like a freight train made of muscle and bad intentions. This thing is massive, hairless, barely human anymore, and it takes every single round from every single survivor firing simultaneously to bring it down. One person engaging a tank alone is not a strategy, it's a suicide note, but that's just the appetizer. The bridge requires 3 generators to raise. 3 generators means 3 activations, and every single activation spawns another tank. So the survivors aren't just fighting while standing still. They're fighting while sprinting between objectives, splitting their attention between keeping each other alive and actually completing the task that gets them out. Each tank arrives at the exact moment they're most vulnerable, Generator 1, they're already tired. Generator 2, they're burning through their last magazines. Generator 3, someone's limping, someone's screaming, and there's a wall of infected between them and the bridge. 4 people cannot simultaneously fight 3 tanks, activate generators, and cross a bridge. The numbers don't work. Someone has to stay behind to hold those generators while the others run. That's not a dramatic choice. That's arithmetic, and every single one of them knows it. But knowing the math is one thing. Volunteering to be the remainder is something else entirely. Bill's final stand. Here's what the game shows you. Bill goes down, the screen fades to black, and that's it. You fill in the blanks yourself. But the comic doesn't let you look away. The math is simple and brutal. 3 generators need to be activated to raise the bridge. Someone has to stay on the ground to start them while the others cross. That's not a dramatic choice. That's arithmetic. 1 person stays, 3 people live. And Bill makes the calculation before anyone else has to. He doesn't ask for volunteers. He doesn't hesitate. He positions himself at the generator locations and tells the others to move. This is a trained soldier executing a tactical withdrawal, covering his unit's retreat the same way he was trained to do in Vietnam 40 years earlier. The only difference is, this time, the unit is a college dropout, a biker, and a junior systems analyst. The comic shows everything the game couldn't. Bill holding position alone against multiple tanks, firing until there's nothing left to fire, taking hits that would kill any normal person 3 times over. There's no dramatic speech, no tearful goodbye, just a soldier doing his job. The Kill Bill achievement in-game even recognizes the mechanic explicitly, requiring the player controlling Bill to leave the bridge and stay behind. Which is, not ideal, but here's the thing that makes this hit different than most video game deaths. Bill isn't losing his life at that bridge. He's finally finding a use for it. Every section of this comic built toward this exact moment. The Vietnam tours, the shrapnel knee, the decades of purposeless civilian existence where a decorated soldier had 0 meaningful conflict left to fight. The apocalypse didn't take something from Bill. It gave him the one thing peacetime never could, a death that actually mattered. He knows exactly what his choice costs, and he executes it with the calm professionalism of someone who's been waiting his entire life for a reason good enough to stop waiting. But what happens to the people Bill died to save? That answer comes next, the passing. After everything the original survivors endured, you'd expect some kind of resolution. A moment of peace, a quiet ending where the people who lost Bill get to grieve properly and move on. But that's not what happens. That's not what happens at all. The passing DLC takes place chronologically after the sacrifice, set in the suburban town of Rayford, Georgia. The Left 4 Dead 2 survivors stumble into the area and encounter 3 familiar faces standing on the other side of a raised bridge. Zoe, Francis, Lewis, 3 out of 4. Bill is nowhere to be seen, and nobody's eager to explain why. The most telling detail is Zoe, the horror movie girl who joked her way through a zombie apocalypse, who had a quip for every terrible situation, has gone quiet. She's hostile, abrupt, uncharacteristically aggressive toward the new group in a way that makes 0 sense unless you understand what she just went through. She's not being rude. She's being someone who watched a man die for her less than a week ago and hasn't figured out how to carry that yet. The original survivors have pushed into Louisiana, and they're facing another bridge crossing, another impossible scenario, another moment where the military doesn't care, and the infected never stop. The same pattern, repeating forever, defended bridges, hostile authority, impossible odds, no finish line. And that's the thing about the sacrifice. It didn't end the story, it just made the story hurt more. Zoe, Francis, and Louis are still out there somewhere, carrying Bill's death into an unresolved future with no indication that safety exists anywhere on the map. The sacrifice wasn't a conclusion, it was a wound that never closes. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.